Om Vishnupad Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj. We are here reading Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 1, Creation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Chapter 15, Text 9. Yate jasa nripo shiro nrigrim ahan makartam aryo nujastabhagajuta sattvaviryaha tenarita pramatanata makaya bhupa yamochitas tad anhayan balim advarete. Your respectable younger brother, who possesses the strength of 10,000 elephants, killed by his grace Jarasandha, whose feet were worshipped by many kings. These kings had been brought for sacrifice in Jarasandha's Mahabhairava Yajna, but they were thus released. Later they paid tribute to your majesty. Purport. Jarasandha was a very powerful king of Magadha, and the history of his birth and activities is also very interesting. His father, King Brihadrata, was also a very prosperous and powerful king of Magadha, but he had no son, although he married two daughters of King Kasi. Being disappointed in not getting a son from either of the two queens, the king, along with his wives, left home to live in the forest for austerities. But in the forest he was benedicted by one rishi to have a son, and he gave him one mango to be eaten by the queens. The queens did so and were very soon pregnant. The king was very happy to see the queens bearing children, but when the ripe time approached, the queens delivered one child in two parts, one from each of the queens' wombs. The two parts were thrown in the forest where a great she-demon used to live, and she was glad to have some delicate flesh and blood from the newly born child. Out of curiosity, she joined the two parts, and the child became complete and regained life. The she-demon was known as Jara, and being compassionate on the childless king, she went to the king and presented him with the nice child. The king was very much pleased with the she-demon and wanted to reward her according to her desire. The she-demon expressed her desire that the child be named after her, and thus the child was surnamed Jarasandha, or the one who was joined by Jara, the she-demon. In fact, this Jarasandha was born as one of the parts and parcels of the demon Viprachiti. The saint by whose benedictions the queens bore the child was called Chandra Kosika, who foretold of the child before his father Brihadrata. Since Jarasandha possessed demoniac qualities from birth, naturally he became a great devotee of Lord Shiva, the lord of all ghostly and demoniac men. Ravana was a great devotee of Shiva, and so also Jarasandha. He used to sacrifice all arrested kings before Lord Mahabhairava, Shiva, and by his military power he defeated many small kings and arrested them to butcher before Mahabhairava. There are many devotees of Lord Mahabhairava, or Kala Bhairava, in the province of Bihar, formerly called Magadha. Jarasandha was a relative of Kamsa, the maternal uncle of Krishna, and therefore, after Kamsa's death, King Jarasandha became a great enemy of Krishna, and therefore were many fights between Jarasandha and Krishna. Lord Krishna wanted to kill him, but he also wanted that those who served as military men for Jarasandha might not be killed. Therefore, a plan was adopted to kill him. Krishna, Bhima, and Arjuna together went to Jarasandha in the dress of poor brahmanas and begged charity from King Jarasandha. Jarasandha never refused charity to any brahmana, and he performed many sacrifices also, yet he was not on a par with devotional service. Lord Krishna, Bhima, and Arjuna asked Jarasandha for the facility of fighting him, and it was settled that Jarasandha would fight with Bhima only. So all of them were both guests and combatants of Jarasandha, and Bhima and Jarasandha fought every day for several days. Bhima became disappointed, but Krishna gave him hints about Jarasandha's being joined together as an infant, and thus Bhima dissected him again and so killed him. All the kings who were detained in the concentration camp to be killed before Mahabhairava were thus released by Bhima. Feeling thus obliged to the Pāṇḍavas, they paid tribute to King Yudhisthira. Text 10. Patnyastabhadhimikaha klapta mahabhisheka shlagista charu kabaram kitavaisabhayam spristam vikirya padayo patitasrumukya yastat striho krita hatesha vimukta kesha. It was he only who loosened the hair of all the wives of the miscreants who dared open the cluster of your queen's hair, which had been nicely dressed and sanctified for the great Rajasuya sacrificial ceremony. At that time she fell down at the feet of Lord Krishna with tears in her eyes. Queen Draupadi, this is the purport, Queen Draupadi had a beautiful bunch of hair which was sanctified in the ceremonial function of Rajasuya Yagya. But when she was lost in a bet, Dushasana touched her glorified hair to insult her. Draupadi then fell down at the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, and Lord Krishna decided that all the wives of Dushasana and the company should have their hair loosened as a result of the battle of Kurukshetra. Thus, after a battle of Kurukshetra, after all the sons and grandsons of Dhritarashtra died in battle, all the wives of the family were obliged to loosen their hair as widows. In other words, all the wives of the Kuru family became widows because Dushasana was insulting a great devotee of the Lord. The Lord can tolerate insults upon himself by any miscreant because the Father tolerates even insults from the Son, but he never tolerates insults upon his devotees. By insulting a great soul, one has to forego all the results of pious acts and benedictions also. Text 11. Yono jugo pavanetya duranta kricharad durvashasori rachitad ayutagra bhugya shakana shishtam upyajuya yatastrilokim triptam amastasali levinhimagna shanga. During our exile, Durvasa Muni, who eats with his 10,000 disciples, intrigued with our enemies to put us in dangerous trouble. At that time, he, Lord Krishna, simply by accepting the remnants of food, saved us. By his accepting food, thus the assembly of Munis, while bathing in the river, felt sumptuously fed, and all the three worlds were also satisfied. Purport. Durvasa Muni, a powerful mystic Brahmana determined to observe the principles of religion with great vows and under strict austerities. His name is associated with many historical events, and it appears that the great mystic could be both easily satisfied and easily annoyed, like Lord Shiva. When he was satisfied, he could do tremendous good to the servitor, but if he was dissatisfied, he could bring about the greatest calamity. Kumari Kunti, at her father's house, used to minister all kinds of services to all great brahmanas, and being satisfied with her good reception, Durvasa Muni benedicted her with the power to call any demigod she desired. It is understood that he was a plenary incarnation of Lord Shiva, and thus he could be either easily satisfied or annoyed. He was a great devotee of Lord Shiva, and by Lord Shiva's order accepted the priesthood of King Svetaketu, because of the king's performance of sacrifice for 100 years. Sometimes he used to visit the parliamentary assembly of the heavenly kingdom of Indradev. He could travel in space by his great mystic powers, and it is understood that he traveled a great distance through space, even up to the Vaikuntha planets beyond material space. He traveled all these long distances within 1 year during his quarrel with King Ambarish, the great devotee and emperor of the world. He had about 10,000 disciples, and wherever he visited and became a guest of great Kshatriya kings, he used to be accompanied by a number of followers. Once he visited the house of Duryodhana, the enemy cousin of Maharaj Yudhisthira. Duryodhana was intelligent enough to satisfy the Brahmana by all means, and the great Rishi wanted to give some benediction to Duryodhana. Duryodhana knew his mystic powers, and he knew also that the mystic Brahmana, if dissatisfied, could cause some havoc, and thus he designed to engage the Brahmana to show his wrath upon his enemy cousins, the Pandavas. When the rishi wanted to award some benediction to Duryodhana, the latter wished that he should visit the house of Maharaj Yudhisthira, who was the eldest and chief among all his cousins. But by his request he would go to him after he had finished his meals with his queen, Draupadi. Duryodhana knew that after Draupadi's dinner it would be impossible for Maharaj Yudhisthira to receive such a large number of Brahmana guests, and thus the rishi would be annoyed and would create some trouble for his cousin Maharaj Yudhisthira. That was the plan of Duryodhana. Durvasa Muni agreed to this proposal, and he approached the king in exile, according to the plan of Duryodhana, after the king and Draupadi had finished their meals. On his arrival at the door of Maharaj Yudhisthira, he was at once well received, and the king requested him to finish his noontime religious rites in the river, for by that time the foodstuff would be prepared. Durvasa Muni, along with his large number of disciples, went to take bath in the river, and Maharaj Yudhisthira was in great anxiety about the guests. As long as Draupadi had not taken her meals, food could be served to any number of guests, but the rishi, by the plan of Duryodhana, reached there after Draupadi had finished her meals. When the devotees are put into difficulty, they have an opportunity to recollect the Lord with rapt attention. So Draupadi was thinking of Lord Krishna in that dangerous position, and the all-pervading Lord could at once know the dangerous position of his devotees. He therefore came there on the scene and asked Draupadi to give whatever food she might have in her stock. On her being so requested by the Lord, Draupadi was sorrowful because the Supreme Lord asked her for some food and she was unable to supply it at that time. She said to the Lord that the mysterious dish which she had received from the sun god could supply any amount of food if she herself had not eaten. But on that day she had already taken her meals, and thus they were in danger. By expressing her difficulty, she began to cry before the Lord, as only a woman would do in such a position. The Lord, however, asked Draupadi to bring up the cooking pots to see if there was any particles of foodstuff left, and on Draupadi's doing so, the Lord found some particles of vegetables sticking to the pot. The Lord at once picked it up and ate it. After doing so, the Lord asked Draupadi to call for her guests, the company of Durvasa. Bhima was sent to call them from the river. Bhima said, "Why are you delaying, sirs? Come on, the food is ready for you." But the Brahmanas, because of Lord Krishna's accepting a little particle of food, felt sumptuously fed, even while they were in the water. They thought that since Maharaj Yudhisthira must have prepared many valuable dishes for them, and since they were not hungry and could not eat, the king would feel very sorry, so it was better not to go there. Thus they decided to go away. This incident proves that the Lord is the greatest mystic, and therefore he is known as Yogeshvara. Another instruction is that every householder must offer food to the Lord, and the result will be that everyone, even a company of guests numbering 10,000, will be satisfied because of the Lord's being satisfied. That is the way of devotional service. Thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 12 on Monday, hopefully. All glories to Om Vishnupad, Srila Bhakti Niskam Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad, Srila Bhakti Vigyan Muni Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad, Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad, Srila Bhakti Nirmala Charya Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad, Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad, Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to Om Vishnupad Jagad Guru Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Jai. All glories to our Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All glories to the worldwide devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Nrishingapuri Dham Ki Jai, Ekachakra Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Ju Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham ki jai. Sham Kund Radha Kund ki jai. Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrinda Devi ki jai. Nitai Gora Pramanandi Hari 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 Bo. My humble Dandavat Pranam.